What she said here is the right answer if I've ever heard it. You need to be up here with me. Writing is to do it. You have to do it to get better. You have to do it to be able to have a draft that's finished. A lot of the times, some of us might start something and be like, I'll come back to it later. No, you have to keep doing it. You have to repeat the process, go over the drafts. And we're going to talk today about getting into screenwriting and what that looks like for you guys. Everybody's process can be different. I'm going to give you the process that, most people seem to like to do. But just remember that each of you is different. And it's okay if you're like, I don't think this part is necessarily for me. I want to change this up a little bit. So we're not married to anything here, but I'm going to show you guys the most basic process. So there's screenwriting, and then there's regular writing that you learn in school. So if you are like me, when you were in school, in your English class, you were taught to write a certain way in paragraphs. You wanted to give details. So if I was to describe this room, I might say, the girl entered into a big white room with clear painted walls. When we're screenwriting, we don't say all of that. We got to get to the point very quick. We got to be snappy. Enter girl into white room. Very basic, very simple. So that's kind of the difference. When we're screenwriting, we want to create a blueprint for the camera and for the actors. When we're doing novel writing, this is where you're trying to tell a whole visual story that you can see and that you can hear. You might, when a person eats a piece of pie, in a novel, you're going to be like, oh yeah, the pie smelled like blueberries and it was rich with flavor. You're not doing all that when you're screenwriting. You're just like, actor one takes pie, takes a bite. Very simple. What is the format? The format is the most important thing I would say that you're going to learn today. Because if you ever decide that you would like to sell a script, most of the time they need the format to look like this. You'd have to have one heck of a script for them to accept it and it not look like this. It can happen, but most of the time they're going to be like, amateurs work, trash can. So this is what the script is going to look like. You're going to have your scene heading up here. If you can't see it, it says ext.suburbanhome. It's like a little dash, and then it says night. Does anybody know what ext means? Exterior. Perfect, yes. This means we are outside of the home. If we were inside this room, does anybody know what I would put instead of ext? Yep, int. So you're going to start with either inside or outside. Then you're going to say where you're at. This could be living room, kitchen, junkyard, school. And then you'll say what time of day it is. Is it nighttime? Is it daytime? If you want to get real specific sometimes, because it has to be shot during maybe sunset, you might say golden hour, just something like that. The next part under here, we have the action. The action is the description of what's going on during the scene. So right here in this scene, it says we open on a modern suburban home. The front window is illuminated by the lights inside. We see the silhouette of a small human figure as it runs back and forth. We push in closer and slowly see a boy running through the house. Now, I would say this one is still even a little bit too much information. You can kind of cut it down a little bit as long as we know, okay, it's nighttime, we see this house, the boy's running through the house. We don't have to necessarily paint it too much. After that, we have your character. So here the character's name is Filbert. Never heard that one before, but that's his name. So the character name is always going to go in the middle of your page. And underneath the character's name is going to be the dialogue. So this is what they're saying. When you see the character, you can just put Filbert and say what he said. If the character is off screen, you're going to put O.S when he's writing. That means off screen. So that might be like during one of those scenes where a person's in a weird situation and they're like, you're probably wondering how I got here. That will be your off screen. If they're talking to you like I am in this room and somebody wanted to write this, that would just be regular Filbert talking. After that, we're going to go to, let's say up here. You usually want to start with a fade in or a fade out. That will always go on the opposite side of the page. It'll be at the very top. Sometimes it can be in the middle if you're saying like cut to this scene. Sometimes it can be at the very bottom if you're saying fade out because we're going to transition or because it's the end of the story. Any questions so far? Perfect. All right. For your dialogue, we'll skip back over. You want to make sure your dialogue is also centered. If they're talking into the phone, for example, you might put parentheses. If they're smiling or laughing, you might want to also put parentheses and still have it next to whatever they're saying. And then sometimes you'll have a subheader. This one can be used if you're doing like a montage scene and you're like, okay, they start off in the hallway. They're opening up their locker, close their locker, and then you're like, classroom. They go sit down at the desk, take out a piece of paper, and then you're like, okay, class is over, so you're gonna cut to bathroom. They're in the bathroom, they're looking in the mirror, fluffing their hair. That's when you would do that. I don't usually do that one too much unless I'm doing montages. I like to keep it clear on where we're going so that once the person who is directing it or editing it looks at it, they're clearly seeing, okay, we're in interior, we're in exterior. Make sense? All right. Sometimes you can put the shot type in there. So here, if you can see it on the screen, it says Filbert's point of view, POV. You can do that if you're trying to say, hey, this is very important. We need to see it from their point of view. Or if you think it's very important that there's like a really, really close-up shot or something, like just of their mouth saying something, you can do it there. Usually, I would say that you want to try to not put too many shot types in here. It is the cinematographer and director's job usually to try to figure out how they're going to film certain things. However, if it's important to the story, then you can put that in there and say, yes, think about it this way. Besides that, I think we've hit on everything. Is there any questions on how that format works? Yes?
So, like I said, I'm kind of self-taught a little bit. But if you don't have all those things, like
The parentheticals?
extensions and all those things listed, if you just have the main body, is that good enough to use as a film?
If you have like just most of these, but maybe not like these parentheses you're saying and stuff like that?
Right, like I'm a cheater, I'm using Final Draft, which kind of helps you.
Yes, you're not a cheater. That's what I would recommend all of you to use, and anybody who wants to do that. I would say for parenthetical specifically, that one's not as important. Usually when you're doing a parenthetical, you're doing it because you're like smiling very happily. Maybe the guy is proposing to the girl, so that's why you put smiling there. But sometimes that can be implied. Or maybe somebody says something and you want them to have a snarky smile because the sentence itself could be seen as either them being nice or what I call nasty nice. So that's when you might want to use something like that. But no, I would say when you're submitting these things, that's not going to be the deal breaker. The deal breaker will probably be if they see a novel. Like imagine if I dropped a Harry Potter novel size stack of papers on somebody and you had to read it that way. They're not going to read it. They're not going to be too happy with me either. You want to try to have like something's formatted this way because they're usually skimming it. They're usually trying to get to the point. So I wouldn't say that, when you're going through this, that you should be too caught up on the tiny, tiny details. As long as you have the big general gist of it, you're fine.
Are people still doing what they call synopsis and things of that nature? Are they still doing that?
Yes, so sometimes people will submit a synopsis. Sometimes they'll put it like in the front or in the back of the stack of the script. That way, if a person wants to just cut to the chase and see who, what, when, where, why, they can see that and be like, okay, I'm interested in this script. I'll go ahead and actually read through it. Or they'll be like, nope, I am not interested in this. I'll pass it along to somebody else who might be, or I'll throw it away. So that can be a good option for you as well.
Or treatment, so
Yeah.
is that the same thing?
Treatment has a little bit more details to it. It really just depends on how much you kind of write out with it.
Thank you.
And then anybody that speaks, grab a microphone so we can get some clear audio for the video. Sorry.
No, you're fine. All right, so I'm going to tell you guys about the 3-act structure. The 3-act structure is usually how movies that you watch appear. This is generally how it will happen. Does it always happen like this? No. Sometimes it's okay to break the rules and not have it exactly be like this. But other times, if you're maybe starting off and you're trying to figure what's next in my story, this is a good thing to turn to. So let's begin with Act 1. This is your setup. This is you setting up the movie. You want to have a beginning. So this could be, let's think of a movie that you guys have seen. What's a general movie that I feel like you guys have probably seen? Shrek? I feel like it's been a while since I've seen that one. Lion King. That's a good one. We can do that. Okay, so the very beginning. What happens in the very beginning of Lion King? What is the setup? Anybody know?
I think it's like the sun rising up and somebody's like singing.
The circle of life. So that beginning is going to be what we would call, when Simba's born, kind of that coronation ceremony. That's the beginning. So you're setting it up like, oh, the king and the queen have had a prince. Okay, that's the setup for that. Next, you're going to want an inciting incident. An inciting incident is going to be a problem that basically kicks your movie into full gear. Like, everything's starting out great. We've just had a baby. He's a prince. And then the inciting incident is we see Scar is jealous. Scar does not like the fact that they just had a baby and now he won't ever become king. Cool? So our second thoughts, essentially, this is it's a little bit weird to call it this, in my opinion, but essentially this is going to kind of be where you're starting to see, like, okay, my story, we're still progressing. We see that there's a problem, maybe the story will shift this way, maybe it'll shift that way. The important thing about the second thoughts is you should still be trying to set it up for the climax of Act 1. The climax of Act 1 for The Lion King is Mufasa's death. So how did we do our second thoughts? Well, we set it up by Scar saying, hey, if you really want to be brave, you should go to this elephant graveyard and check it out. And when that incident didn't really happen, he was like, hey, your father has a surprise for you. Just wait right here. I'll be right back. So that's kind of your second thoughts. You're kind of setting it up for that climax. Does that make sense so far? Cool. So climax of Act 1, the saddest part in cinematic history, Mufasa's death. So now we get to an obstacle. The first obstacle that we're kind of getting to is that the hyenas are trying to kill Simba. He's running, they're chasing him, he doesn't know what to do. We get to our second obstacle. Now he's escaped the hyenas, but he has nowhere to go, nowhere to live. He's just sitting out, in this desert. The vultures are about to eat him. And then comes Timon and Pumbaa, and they take him in, they adopt him. And eventually we get to this midpoint. Your midpoint is important because it's a big twist in the story. It's kind of where your story starts to shift. But it shouldn't be too big that we start to drop off. That's for your ultimate climax. Your midpoint should just be something that kind of turns your story. So the midpoint in this, can anybody guess what it is? A little bit after, but you're close. Yes. When he sees Nala, that's the midpoint. He's seeing his old life return. He didn't think he would see anybody from his tribe. It's also the midpoint because Nala's like, wait, I thought you were dead. The king is alive. You can come back. You can help us. So that's going to be kind of that midpoint. So we go into our next obstacle. We're building it up. Can anybody guess what this next obstacle is? Because I feel like it's an easy one. It's a musical number. Yes, that's the next obstacle. He's falling in love with Nala. The reason this is an obstacle is because Timon and Pumbaa are kind of like, well, what the heck? We're going to lose our buddy, our son. We don't want him to go back. Then we get into a disaster. Who can tell me what the disaster is?
His father gets killed.
Was it when he was second guessing himself? Because I know he was like kind of going through it, like she was trying to get him to go back, but he didn't want to go back.
We're basically we're kind of getting there. So the disaster is when they start to have that conversation where they start fussing at each other and they're like, I just always remember where they're like, fine. Kind of that's when it's a disaster. They were falling in love and now they're arguing. So we get into our crisis slash our Act 2. He's run off to be alone. He's very upset. He doesn't know who he is. He's mad at his father. He thinks he's the reason his father's dead. That's going to be like our climax. And then what happens during this climax? Mufasa comes to him and he says, you are my son, the one true king. And that makes him realize that the biggest turning point is he needs to go back to Pride Rock. Make sense? All right, so that's your biggest moment. Mufasa has come back and told his son to go home. Now everything is kind of descending. So the descending part is going to be him traveling back, them kind of being like, okay, We got to fight Scar. We got to get everybody out of there. And essentially, you kind of wrap it up once they've done the fighting and everything, and you end with Kiara, the little baby cub, being born. So a lot of stories have a version of this in there. As I said, if you know the rules, you can break the rules. You might see this and be like, I think I can switch this up. I think instead of, doing, my second thoughts, this can be a little bit different. Some movies and different genres do this sometimes. That can be horror, that can be sci-fi. You'll usually see it that way. But yeah, this is the 3-act structure. This is something that can be super helpful when you're writing. All right, let's get to one of my favorite parts, generating ideas. Everything you write will come from an idea. Sometimes, without sounding crazy, I will hear voices, like just having a conversation in my head, and I'll be like, where did that come from? Let me write it out. What does that look like? You know what I mean? Maybe not. I probably do sound crazy, but that's how it comes to me. Everybody's different. Other times, I people watch. So I might see somebody and be like, they'd be an interesting character. I wonder, where they're going in such a rush. I wonder why they have this glamorous outfit on, and I'll write that way. Everybody's different and has their way of generating ideas. Once you've generated an idea, I recommend to do an outline. An outline can help you because you'll plot out what we did in that 3-act structure so that once you begin writing, you're not just, kind of writing as you go and making it all up. It really makes you think and be like, okay, does this make sense as the next step? No, I don't think it works here. Maybe I need to move it here. Yes, that works. Besides that, after creating, your outline, you can start doing your first draft. Never be married to your first draft. I'm not saying that, it's not possible to have a good first draft, but you might, after you've sat down, had a good night's rest, come back and be like, you know what, I think that made these characters too wordy. I need to, make sure that they talk a little bit less. Or you might think, I don't think I have enough locations. I think I need to switch some of the locations where this happened. You could change anything after, you wrote that first draft. And if you are going to turn this into somebody who's going to make it into a film, they're going to change it, more than likely, whether you want them to or not. So don't be married to the first draft. And honestly, if you're going to sell it, don't be married to it at all. Just make your money. So here's some tips to keep in mind. Show, don't tell. That is my number one thing. So if I wanted to write a story, I'm not going to just have my character telling the entire story of what's happened. I'm not going to say, in my life, I grew up and my dad was never there or this like that. I need to show it. So maybe I have my character have a flashback where we see they have a recital and only mom's there, dad's not there. Or they're being like, where's daddy at? Something like that. It's so important to show it because it not only gives you those emotions, but it makes it more interesting. Nobody probably just wants to sit here and watch two characters just talking, and you're not seeing anything, really happening. The next one, as I said, don't be married to your first draft. Always try to rewrite until you're like, yes, I like this better, or yes, this works. Sometimes that might mean having a friend or a trusted person to read it back and be like, hey, I don't really understand this part of it. Can you explain what you meant by this? Okay, maybe that means you need to change it. I recommend that if you ask somebody to read it, they are a person that will be honest with you. Because if you give it to somebody who is maybe it's your significant other, they're always like, oh, that's so great. Everything you do is great. They won't be honest sometimes. Now, if you have a significant other like mine, he gonna be straight up with you. And he gonna be like, I don't understand this. Make it make sense. And I'll be like, you know what? You right. Let me change that. How about this? So go to whoever that person is. That might be mom. That might be best friend. That might be my neighbor. Whoever that is for you. I'm always willing to read through a script for you guys, tell you honest feedback. I won't be mean or anything. I don't believe in bashing. I just believe in, hey, I wonder what it would look like if we did this. Or, hey, I didn't really fully understand this. Could you explain that to me? Okay, let's think of a way that maybe we could show that more. Just something like that. Keep action sections short. As I said before, we don't need to know about the rolling green hills of the valley. We just need to know there was hills. We in the Rocky Mountains. That's it. Unless there's something important. If you have a tree in the story and that tree is going to be important because it's going to fall down on mama's house, you can mention it there because it's going to come back. But if it's just a beautiful tree, we don't have to spend 3 pages talking about how beautiful of a tree it is. Finally, tools such as Final Draft, Writer Duet, and Celtics are really good to help you with the format. I personally use Writer Duet. Final Draft is the standard if you're getting into screenwriting, and Celtics is a good one. All of these, they're paid for, but Writer Duet has a free version. I believe you can do up to 3 free projects. I use the free version, and I will write something, print it out when I'm done, and then I'll just get back to rewriting on the same project so I can use it. That's what I do. We balling on a budget. Now it's your turn. I want you guys, don't worry, we're not going to make a full script tonight, but I do want you guys to pick something you want to do. Maybe that's creating a log line. This is who your protagonist is. So let's say it's Simba, plus a flaw or goal. You know, they're running away from their responsibilities because they think they killed their father. You know, actually, I'll change that up. Flaw or goal. Their goal was to become king, but the inciting incident, you know, Scar makes him think he killed his father, plus the stakes are conflict. He has been away for many years, but now he's returned to take his rightful place. That's kind of like your log line. You can create an outline. If you already have an idea that's been kind of talking to you, you'll kind of be like, okay, let's do the 3-act structure. How would this work? Or maybe you're like, no, I don't want to do the full 3-act structure. Let's kind of change this up a little and see where my story can go. And if you've already thought about these two, you might just say, no, I have an idea, I've outlined it, or I've even written it. I just need to put it in the correct format. You can work on that today. Sound good? Is there a page you guys would like me to go back to specifically that you can see better? I don't know which one you guys want to work on.
I do have a question
Mhm.
about the 3-act structure.
Yeah.
So if you go beyond 3 acts and you like doing 4 and 5 and all that, is that not acceptable when you're thinking about turning it in, or
So
keep it in the 3-act structure?
there's not necessarily a 4th or 5th one, but if you have a longer movie, think of the Titanic. It's just going to be longer. It's still going to be those 3 acts, even though the movie's like 3 hours long. You know, Avengers, you know, the, what was it? One of the last 2 Avengers movies that came out, Infinity War and Endgame, still a 3-act structure. It's just super long. So don't think that you have to do a 4th or a 5th. Just think about it as, okay, it's just going to be really long. There's a really long act 1, a really, really long act 2, and then your ending might also be long depending on how much things you have to wrap up. So still 3 acts, but it'll just be longer.
And
Lion
as many
King,
scenes as you want, right?
yeah, you can still do as many scenes as you want. Lion King, it's just one of those that works so well in such a quick amount of time, but you could probably look it up for other movies such as The Godfather and see how that fits into here even though it's 2 hours long. What about you?
I was just gonna ask, does it work the same way? Like if you're doing like a sitcom, is it the same process, or is this just if you're gonna write a film?
It can work the same way. So with sitcoms, they're 30 minutes long. So it's just gonna be a quicker version of what happened in that episode. We could really think about, I don't know how many of you seen The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. One of my favorite episodes is the episode when his father comes back into town. And that one follows this structure pretty well, with Act 1 being, I don't know if I trust this guy, and Act 2 kind of being like, we're leading up to, we've been spending a lot of time together, I'm starting to trust him again, we're gonna go on a road trip, until you hit that climax of, yeah, actually we can't go on that road trip together. And Act 3 is pretty quick. It's just him airing his frustrations with Uncle Phil, you know, until you get to that end. So it can work, it just has to be quicker. But there are, you know, if you really wanted to get into TV specifically, there are different structures you can use and stuff like that. Yeah.
So like, you know how some TV shows usually have like an app part, like part 2,
Mhm.
in case like, you know, like this would be continued. Like, how would you know if like this episode needs to be like, okay, like we're gonna put like to be continued for this one, and then make like try to do like the second.
So I have recently gotten into a show called Degrassi. And Degrassi has a bunch of episodes that's sometimes like part 1, part 2, where you can tell they were like, I can't fit this into the time that's allotted. So I would encourage you to first write it out to however long you think it should be. And then knowing that if you're doing a regular television series that's going to be on network TV, you're only going to get really about 18 minutes of content, and then split it up by those 18 minutes and see where you fall. You know, if you come to 36 minutes, then that's about 2 episodes. You break it in between wherever you can put like some type of moment where it's like, man, what's going to happen next? And sometimes it might be something, if you're doing a ongoing drama series, sometimes you can do that 3-act structure through 6 episodes. There's a way to do it. You really just got to use creativity and always leave something where the audience is like, I got to be there next week to watch the next episode. But if you get into Netflix, it doesn't matter how long it is. It could be, you know, 45 minutes. Look at Black Mirror. It doesn't matter with Netflix. So I would encourage you, even if it is something that's like, well, this is like 42 minutes, Makayla, Netflix, it can work. Any other questions? Yeah.
Something you said just triggered something I read before. Like, you can tell, like, a short film is typically like this amount of pages of dialogue. A feature film is like this amount of pages of dialogue. Is that like a standard or a true statement, or something I just read online?
I'm not fully sure. I think about what it would say. I would need to read the article, but I can tell you what I've learned from doing and what people told me as I was learning. Usually 1 page is going to be 1 minute in film. So if you got 20 pages, it's about 20 minutes. Now this is rough, and it depends on, is there a lot of action that's going on? Because action might be a lot to write down, and that really might only be like 20 seconds, but it takes up, you know, all of your page, you know what I mean? So it really depends. If you're doing a regular script like this one though, it's usually about 1 minute per page. Any other questions? Yeah.
To get the audience to understand maybe the beginning, what the context of the story is, I know you can have the actors talk, but what do you think about a narration mixed in with dialogue? Do you write scripts where there's a narrator? And in what situation might you do that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of, you can do it with movies, you can do it with TV shows, or maybe the person is narrating something and then you go into dialogue, you know, to kind of give a backstory if you didn't have time. Recently I watched a movie, I think it was How to Date Billy Walsh is what it was called. It's on Amazon Prime. But they do a lot of that. Like, there's a lot of narration throughout while still having like that dialogue. At the very beginning, he's in one of those situations where you see them throwing cake all over him at, I think it's the prom. And, you know, it's kind of one of those, yeah, I kind of deserve that, and I'll tell you why I deserve that. And then you go back and you see the dialogue that he has, and then it'll cut to him being like, yeah, this is the girl that I really liked. We knew each other since we were kids. And then you cut forward a little bit. So it's possible. There's just a way to do it. And I would encourage you to watch stuff like that to see how they do it and kind of